Now today we're picking up with chapter, again, our second study in chapters 9 and 10. In our last class we more or less observed the basic outline of the 9th chapter, and we tried to relate how the chapter 9 in John is intimately connected to both the preceding chapter and the subsequent chapter. How is John chapter 9 related to chapter 8? Or chronologically, it's same time. What else? Same place. Geographically or topographically, same location, basically. Chapter 8 was in the temple. Chapter 9 is passing by through the outside of the temple or in the environs of the temple. Right? So closely related in space and time. What else? I'm sorry? Yes, the same basic reactions of Jesus Christ. Remember our general outline of chapters 2 through 12? What are the twofold division of chapters 2 through 12? This is something you should have memorized by now. That's the overall outline for the whole section. Manifested signs of the Son in public. Right, now, what is the basic twofold division of that? We've been tracing. Sorry? That's the first sign. But what is the overarching breakdown, a two-part breakdown of these 10 chapters? I've put it on the board 3-4 times. So I've never actually given it to you in notes, but it's a very natural, logical subdivision. You don't remember?
General reception.
Yes, the time period covered in chapters 2 through 12 can be first seen as stage 1, a period of general reception. In other words, in chapter 2, even when Jesus cleansed the temple, they never really did anything to him. All they did was ask him a question, right? I don't think they were too happy. Do you? Right? He did a miracle in Cana. He turned the water into wine. So that was an interesting time. Chapter 3, Nicodemus favorably responded. Chapter 4, the woman at the well, Jacob's well in Sychar, favorably responded. The Sycharites favorably responded. The second miracle in Cana, favorable response. Okay? So chapters 2 through 4 show us Christ's public signs in a time in which he was quite popular, right? If you actually were, I think in theology class, one of the last classes we had, I gave you a threefold division of the public ministry of Jesus Christ: period of the year of popularity or obscurity, the year of popularity, and the year of opposition. Remember that? Remember that division of his public ministry? And we see that right here in chapters 2 through 4. So first division, we have Christ publicly ministering in a period of general reception, and it changes dramatically in chapter 5. We find him down in Jerusalem, and the whole of chapter 5 exists of Jesus' own public defense when they tried to kill him for working on the Sabbath day. That was a watershed experience in the ministry of Christ. That healing of the was it the lame man? The impotent man, right? Seated at the pool of Bethesda. Okay? That was one that stuck in their minds. That was the more or less the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of people's unwillingness to overtly react to Jesus Christ. So they did react. Where am I here? We're talking about the relationship of chapter 9 to chapters 8 and 10. What we're seeing in chapter 9, oh yes, that's the point. The point that raised this review is that chapter 9 gives us the same sort of reaction to Christ that we see both in chapter 10 and in chapter 8, which is what kind of reaction? It's divided reaction, but from the officials, from the upper caste in Jewish society, the Pharisees, scribes, and the Sanhedrists, we find overt opposition in each of these three chapters. So they're all unified in that way. Okay? I want you to see that chapters 8 and 9 are intimately connected chronologically. When we come to chapter 10, what's the point of connection between chapters 9 and 10? Pardon? Shepherd isn't even mentioned once in chapter 9. You might be able to, you might point out that the language, the teaching format in chapter 10 seems to be somewhat more formal in chapter 10, whereas in chapter 9 it's very informal. He's dealing with an individual. I agree with that. But I think there's a closer point of contrast or connection. How is chapter 9 related to chapter 10? Yes, in both cases he's identifying himself. That's too general. I mean that's good as far as it goes. Okay. I would suggest that the parable of the sheep and the shepherd that opens chapter 10 and the results of which continue down to verse 21. So I would say the first 21 verses of chapter 10 are actually what was said at the very time of chapter 9. In other words, when Jesus met with this man over in chapter 9 verse 35 that had been cast out, excommunicated. The man believed, and it says in verse 39 that he turned around and Jesus was talking to the Pharisees. See that? Verse 39. Jesus said, "For judgment I am come into this world, that they who see not might see, that they who see might be blind." And some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said unto him, "Are we blind also?" And Jesus said unto them, "If you were blind, you should have no sin, but now you say we see, therefore your sin remains. Verily I say unto you," and you could read right on into chapter 10 as a continuation of the narrative. So actually, chronologically speaking, in terms of time and place and people, the story of chapter 9 continues right on to the 21st verse of chapter 10. That's the point of connection. That's the point. This relationship that Jesus had with the Pharisees as being the light to their world, he used a second analogy at the same time as the shepherd of the stray sheep. You understand? It was given at the very same time that he dealt with this excommunicated, healed man. So chronologically, chapters 8 and 9 and the first 21 verses of chapter 10 are all a unit, right, in terms of the story. But how is the second part of chapter 10 related to the first part of chapter 10? That's an important question. The theme. It's exactly the same theme, is it not? What's the theme of the first part of chapter 10? shepherd and sheep, and that's brought up again at a later time. Right? Verse 26, Jesus raises the same analogy that he used much earlier in Jerusalem. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, they follow me. I give to them eternal life. I personally believe this is why the Apostle John took this subsequent event at Jerusalem at the Feast of Dedication, Solomon's Porch. I believe he took this second event that was separated in terms of months from the time that he was there in chapter 9 and the first part of chapter 10. See? I believe John simply, look at Jesus is talking about the shepherd and sheep relationship, the fact that he leads, he guides, and of course some sheep will be rebellious. That's the idea. And John takes this and he juxtaposes, he jams them side by side to make a point. All right? To make a point. So the point that he makes in chapter 10 is essentially the same point that he makes in chapter 9, which is essentially the same point that he makes in chapter 8. Right? And this is just bringing a cumulative effect, a cumulative emphasis on what point? What is the point that is being made? What is the whole point of these 3 chapters? What do we see here happening?
Well, I think it's brilliant, his overall rejection, but he's identifying himself.
Precisely. I think that obviously this is the preliminary circumstances that led to his crucifixion, right? I mean, we all understand that. That's normal, logical. But while at the very time that Jesus is being rejected, he is proving over and over and over again in circumstance after circumstance that he's quite capable. He ought to be believed in, not rejected. There's a real contrast here. You know, in chapter 8, what was the sign of chapter 8? What did we call it? Check out your notes. What did we say the sign was for chapter 8? The sign of the unknown prophet. I mean, he preaches. He's well known for his preaching, but they really don't know him, right? We come to chapter 9. What did we say the sign of chapter 9 was? Pardon? Not chapter 9. The sign of the light giver. He gives light to the blind man. There's no mention of shepherd until chapter 10. Okay. Yeah. I gave you 2 outlines for this section because in one sense it's artificial to just look at chapter 9 by itself. Okay? But if you do look at chapter 9 as a distinct episode in which he sticks with the one theme of light, which runs all the way through it, then you can take that as a distinct sign. In chapter 10, same circumstances, what would you guess the sign would be?
Just chapter 10.
Yeah, if you just take chapter 10, what do you think the sign of chapter 10 would be, based on the analogy? The sign of a working shepherd. Right? Well, what kind of work does the shepherd do? Well, he leads, he feeds, he protects, he guides, he reveals. That's essentially related to the sign in chapter 9 that the shepherd gives light. I mean, the healer gives light. Well, the shepherd provides, he works for the sheep. There's a very close affinity between those two figures of speech. If you were to take chapters 9 and 10 together, as in the outline that I gave you before, it's a light-giving shepherd. Isn't that what sign of the working shepherd or the light-giving shepherd, providing abundantly for his sheep. Look at chapter 10 for a moment, just to reinforce this point. Verses 3 and 4. To him the porter opens, that is to the true shepherd. The sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. And when he puts forth his own sheep, he goes before them. And the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Isn't there a point of connection between speaking on the one hand and revealing? This means giving light. To reveal means to uncover, right? So when I preach to you, if I speak words to you that you don't know, that illumines your mind, it's like a light giver. At the same time, it's the shepherd speaking to his sheep. And so there's a very close affinity between these two figures of speech. In chapter 9, it's giving light, it's revealing. Well, that's precisely what the shepherd does for his sheep. He speaks to his sheep. They understand. They see, right, when he speaks. Now, that's the big picture. Did I not already go through chapter 9 with you last class? Didn't we cover most of chapter 9? I gave you a general outline. I stressed for you that the same thing is happening in chapter 9 that was happening in chapter 8. The people did not know. Key words to chapter 9 include not knowing. They're all the way through that chapter as well, right? Plus the new theme of light and revelation. Let's move on to chapter 10 this morning. Find my outline here. All right, if you want an individual outline for chapter 10, here it is. Two main divisions. The first 21 verses, of course, are a unit. We've already observed that. 10:1 to 21 gives to us Jesus' analogy. A-N-A-L-O-G-Y. An analogy. The shepherd's works are elaborated. He elaborates the shepherd's works, first of all, in a parable, verses 1 to 6. And then in verses 7 to 18, in a conference. What's a conference? If you make a conference call, that's a weird word if you think about it. Say it 10 times and think about it every time you say it. Conference, conference, conference. It's a weird word. What does it mean? Talking together, sure. A group discussion. That's basically what you have. The parable is one person speaking, right? Whereas a conference call or a conference, any kind of a conference, is a group discussion. And the end result of the conference in verses 19 to 21, the net result, division. Mostly unbelief. That's what we have. That's the breakdown here. It's not alliterated. We have a parable, we have a conference, and we have the net result, division. Now in verses 22 to 42, the end of the chapter, the second main division, we have an amplification. Remember now that the only thing that relates these two sections of chapter 10 together, 10a and 10b, is the theme of the shepherd. Alright? It's the only thing that relates them together. Same theme. They occur at different times. Probably not the same specific Jews involved, although you couldn't prove that. And there was a similar result. So really, by picking this later event, John gives to us an amplification of the same points made in the beginning of the chapter. Now we have the shepherd's works emphasized. The shepherd's works emphasized. In verses 22 to 24, we have an encounter. His works are emphasized in an encounter. Verses 25 to 39, his works are emphasized in his explanations. And in verses 40 to 42, what was the net result of this particular episode? Pardon? Well, yes, that's actually in a different situation. Verse 39 actually says that they tried to kill him, so he ran away. And 39 says that they tried to kill him, and so he had to retreat. So the net result was hostility and retreat. And just by way of contrast, John points out that later, where Jesus actually was with his with a different thinking crowd, there was belief, not hostility. So we really do see a division again, really. On the one hand, hostility, on the other hand, reception. Now, let me just simplify what I've given to you even further. Okay? I really believe that the same thing happens in both halves of this chapter. In the first part of the chapter, we have a division among the people resulting from a discussion that started out of a parable. Right? So we have a parable that leads to a discussion that results in division. In the second part of the chapter, it's not a parable, it's a confrontation. So it's a discussion that results out of a confrontation that leads to a division. Same sort of scenario, slightly different. Jesus isn't really given a parable here in the second part of the chapter. Let's read it. Okay, let's look at the first one. Before I do, let me just point out a couple of key observations about the subject matter here. There are 48 references, direct and indirect, to Jesus as the shepherd in this 10th chapter. If you take every direct reference and all the personal pronouns, him, his, and so forth, there are 48 references to Christ as the shepherd. There are 36 references to the sheep. There are 17 references to false shepherds, hirelings, strangers, thieves, and robbers. Nine references to people not knowing. So this theme continues through from chapter 8. Now, take, well, I don't want to, I think it'd be better if we read it out loud. Why don't we read, why don't each of us take a turn, we'll just start, I'll start, and then Tracy and Blair and Steve and so forth, and we'll read the first 21 verses here, okay? Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that enters not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber.
But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep.
To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out.
When he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice.
And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers.
This parable spoke Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things it was that he spoke.
All right, so at that point the parable is completed. Now we have the conference.
Then said Jesus unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep.
All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them.
I am the door. By me if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture.
The thief cometh not to steal, and to kill, but to destroy. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have it more abundantly.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep.
But he that is in hiding, not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. The wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep.
The hireling flees because he is an hireling, and careth not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known of mine.
As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep.
Another sheep I have that are not of this fold, them I also must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall come. There shall be one fold and one shepherd.
Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, and I may take it again.
No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. Stop for a moment. That's the end of the conference. Okay, this is the end of the discussion that resulted from the parable. Now we have the net result.
There was a division, therefore, again among the Jews for these sayings.
And many of them said, He hath a demon, and is mad. Why hear him?
Others said, It is not the words of him that hath the devil, and the devil from the eyes of the one.
Right. Notice that verse 20 is an allusion back to chapter 8. Many of them said he has a demon and is mad. That's exactly what they had charged him earlier on in this very same day in the temple. See? He's out of the temple now, and some of these same people are there, and they clue into that earlier statement. In verse 21, we have a reference to the events of chapter 9. These are not the words of him that has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? See? So these people are cluing into the fact that he had actually healed this blind man in chapter 9. And so this proves that there is an intimate relationship between 10a and chapters 8 and 9. Now, the first thing I want you to do with me is to make a list of the specific works of the shepherd given in this parable and in the ensuing that come out in the ensuing discussion. Let's make a list. Start from verse 1. Specific actions that are attributed to the shepherd. Okay, enters legitimately. Okay, so he comes properly. What else? Okay, calls the sheep by name. Identify the verse that you're drawing it from. Verse 3, okay. Right? He leads the sheep. To lead them out, do you think that is synonymous with going before them? Or do you think there might be a point of difference there? To me, the statement that he goes before them suggests that this is his habitual practice, that he's up front all the time, whereas when he leads them out means that he said that's the bringing out of wherever they were before, right? That may be stretching it, but there are different words used. You know, you don't even know, maybe the tenses might be slightly different as well, that would imply something unique about each of those. So leading out and going before, I would suggest, are quite possibly different actions of the shepherd. What else? What is implied at the end of verse 4? Yeah, it's not just that he calls the sheep, come on, let's go, but there's an ongoing communication, right? What else? When Jesus said, I am the door of the sheep, what function, what action is he alluding to? What is a door used for?
The way I heard it in the sheepfold, when he speaks, was a job.
Okay. There may be several different ideas associated with that. I've heard that too. That the shepherd at nighttime would lay down in the door, so he's actually the door. You know, nothing can come in or go out except over or through him, right? Well, that's kind of an interesting picture. Maybe that's exactly what Jesus is alluding to. So, not only protection. Maybe that would be the dominant idea there. Protection as door. But the whole idea of legitimacy, that if Jesus is the door, he's the way, stresses the shepherd's legitimate role. He's not illegitimate, he's not a false, he's true. Right? So that's associated with his truthfulness, genuineness, is associated as well with this business when he says, I am the door. Because the hireling comes over the wall, right? And it talks about the porter opening the door. See that? Like, to him the porter opens. Well, if Jesus is the door, what is the idea of the porter opening the door? Like, we know what that would be theologically. Who's the porter? The Holy Spirit is preparing the way. Okay? There may be more to it than just a simple enclosure in the analogy, right? Maybe there's a double enclosure, right? Or something, a double door or something. Whatever. keep going. Further on in the discussion, there are other things come out about the works of the shepherd, the things that he actually does.
Verse 10. Provides a better life and more abundant life.
All right. Actually, both verses 9 and 10, that the shepherd provides, he ensures food, right? Shall go in and out and find pasture, so it provides food and sleep, going in and out, and abundancy. Everything that the sheep needs. Okay, so ultimate provision. Verse 11. Yes, willing to die if necessary for the sheep. Self-sacrificing. Further. Pardon? Where are you? Okay. The good shepherd knows his sheep. Before we leave this point here, we may be jumping the gun. It does say that he would be willing to lay down his life for his sheep, but the emphasis here is not just on the death part, but it's on a day-by-day sacrificial, right? It's a daily sacrifice, constantly providing, right? So constant provision, shepherd's constancy, even to the point of death. Then there's this knowledge, this intimacy with his sheep. Twice he uses the word gnosko in verse 14. I know my sheep, gnosko. That's the deep level of knowledge. All right? Verse 15. Okay? Specifically, willing to die, right? Which would be, okay, further? Important points there, verse 16, 17. Shepherd's work. Yeah, what is he going to do about it? I must bring them. So this is yet future. So he expects, plans, promises to unite these sheep with others. Now, in the analogy, I mean, a rich shepherd would probably have 2 or 3 flocks, perhaps, right? That's not too much to assume. And you know, if he's with one flock, then he's going to have to leave this flock and go get the other one, you know, or whatever. It implies even a separation, perhaps, from these sheep. That's implied. That's not stated, right? There's another time factor involved here. This implies future, right? It implies great wealth, right? It implies wealth. There are several things that are attached to that significant statement, right? So I must bring other sheep, and they shall hear my voice, right? So he's going to speak to his other sheep. Verse 16. And the end of verse 16, there shall be one fold and one shepherd, implies that, well, we've already said it, expects to unite these sheep all together. So this by inference shows overall planning, omniscience, if you will, in application to Christ. And verse 17. unique to this particular shepherd. Not just lays his life down, but takes his own life up again. So this is a prediction of the resurrection. Okay, now if we just took these statements, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 specific works that the shepherd does that you could, which each is an individual thing that has a theological analogy to the spiritual work that Christ does for believers. Right? Now, first of all, this is a very important question. You're going to interpret this passage. Who do you think the sheep are? Pardon? The elect? Disciples? You don't have anybody willing to say that they're the lost?
That's your number.
Where? Other sheep that I have that are not of this fold? That's the way I've always understood it. I don't think he's saying lost versus saved. I think he's talking about Jewish believers here and now at the time that he's speaking. Other sheep I have that I must bring. It probably is his allusion to the church. This is one of the most unique prophecies or predictions that you will find in the life of Christ concerning the church. It doesn't call it the church, but other sheep I have. Does anybody know any good cross references that you could use for this passage?
Isaiah 56,
Which says?
Can't quote it now. It's reference to grace and to the Gentiles as well.
I'm thinking of another New Testament reference in which Jesus himself specifically made reference to future saints, people that would in the future believe, that were over and beyond his present Jewish disciples. You shall be witnesses to me both in Jerusalem. He doesn't talk about the results of their witnessing, that was just the commissioner to witness. John 17, Jesus' prayer. Just hold your finger here and just go there for a moment. If you want a good cross-reference, I think John 17. All the way through the first 18, 19 verses, he's been talking about him and his own immediate disciples. Verse 18, as thou, Father, hast sent me into the world, even so have I also sent them, that is, these 12 disciples into the world. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also might be sanctified through the truth. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also who shall believe on me through their word. See that? Who shall believe. That's the same thing. You're talking about the shepherd laying down his life for the sheep. And Jesus is very evidently, specifically conscious of the fact that, he had a core group here and now, but his death was to ensure that others would believe in the future. And Jesus in John chapter 10, verse 16, more or less predicts that the Gentiles will be brought into the fellowship of the shepherd. Very important passage, isn't it? Right? So we're talking about specific works. 12 specific works in the parable conference that occurred here in the first part of chapter 10. As a result, however, people still couldn't figure it out. They wouldn't accept it. Now what is neat is that when you come to the second episode in chapter 10, you don't have specific works. You have generalized works. Let's read those verses now. One at a time. We'll start from 22 and go right to 42. And I want you to... Put down the specific references to the word work or works, deed, and do, and all those other synonyms. All right? See how many we get here. It was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter.
And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch.
Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, How long dost thou make us to doubt? If thou be the Christ, tell us plainly.
Jesus answered them, I told you, and you believe not. The works that I do in my flesh and in they bear witness of me.
But ye believe not, because you are not of my sheep, as I said unto you. And that's a reference in verse 26, probably back to this earlier episode in Jerusalem.
My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me.
And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand.
Oh, go ahead.
The Father which gave them me is greater than I. No man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand.
I and my Father are one.
Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him.
And Jesus answered them, Many good works have I shown you from my Father, or which of these works do you still?
Jesus answered them, saying, For a good work we stone thee not, for blasphemy, because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God.
Jesus answered them, Is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods?
If he called them gods, unto whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken.
Say ye of him whom the Father hath sanctified, and said to the world, Thou blasphemest, because I said, I am the Son of God.
If I do not the works of my Father, believe me not.
But if I do, though ye believe not me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him.
Therefore they sought again to take him, and he escaped them in a hurry.
When he went away again beyond the Jordan, to the place where John had first baptized, there he came.
And many resorted unto him and said, John did no miracle, but all things that John spake of this man were true.
And many believed on him there. Now let's make a list of the specific works or references to works here. What do we have? I'll just underscore any of the specific ones that have already been mentioned in the first episode that are repeated here, but specific references to works. How many times is this word work or works referred to? Count them up. I only got 6. I don't know. We got 10.
No, there's pronouns used for few. Verse 25, they bear witness of me.
Okay. Right.
Verse 32, verse 2, 37, verse 38. If I do, you said do and work.
Yeah, okay, it references to do.
Verse 37, verse 25, verse 52.
Okay, so we've probably got, just a quick estimate, we've probably got a dozen references to the shepherd doing and working here, or Jesus specifically. And are any of these other specific works mentioned? Which one? Yeah, are any of these specific works mentioned over here? Yes, he says in verse 27, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. So that implies three different works: speaking, and knowing, and leading. Right? So, where we got this here? Okay, ongoing communication, leads out, and knowing. Where's that? Oh yeah, knowledge. Okay, so those are three there. Any more? Okay, gives life. Now that is a point right down here that Jesus earlier said, I'm the good shepherd, right? And I give unto them eternal life. What is it? I am come they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. So this reference to life is, right? The shepherd provides abundancy. What else? Where? Okay. Never perish. So protection. Where is that? Okay. Okay. So there's protection in the parable. It's through the analogy as door. Here it's through the analogy as in Father's hand. Okay. Literally, I mean, a sheep would have protection if it was in the shepherd's hand, right? Okay, so we've got 5 specific references to the shepherd's works, plus a dozen general references to the shepherd working. Now, there's a certain conclusion that we could draw from this. If I was going to compare it, I would say that the sign of this chapter is the working shepherd. The working shepherd, because the deeds of the shepherd is what is emphasized. Now, in the first division, in 1 to 21, I've already told you that the shepherd's works are elaborated. That is, given specific statement, right? We have 15 of them or 16 of them. In the second part, we have an amplification through a second event, same terminology, but it's simply emphasizing the shepherd's works, not elaborating. It's emphasizing in general, or generalized in the second one. That make sense to you? So we really have a theme here that runs all the way through. These topical observations, all the references to the words used in the analogy: sheep, sheepfold, porter, hireling, stranger, thief, robber, wolf, door, gate, some other way, hearing and following and knowing, and all of those references really put the emphasis on the working shepherd. Last class I asked you to look up a couple of things. Just this is getting away from the topic, but I just did want to touch on it because I asked you to do it. I wanted you to give me a map of the temple, and that outlined Solomon's porch, and where the old city of Jerusalem is, and the pool of Siloam, and stuff like that. You got that? Be sure to hand that in to me today. This is a picture, by the way, of a scaled down model of the city of Jerusalem that exists. Like if you were to go to Jerusalem, you could pay money and walk through this place. All right? And this is a picture of the what they feel the Herodian temple looked like. And this highest spot in the temple was the Holy of Holies, right? Immediately in front of the Holy of Holies there was a wall with a gate, and that wall separated the priests, the court of the priests, which is from there backwards, and surrounded the Holy of Holies, with the temple of the court of the women up front here, see? The court of the women and Gentiles extended in front of this gate to the outer walls. Now if you look at this, this is looking north. This picture is taken north, looking that way. Okay? The eastern wall of the temple in the eastern gate is over here. The Tyropenian Valley and the Kidron Valley are over here on the east side. The Mount of Olives is off the picture to the right. And Solomon's porch was on the western and south wall of the temple. That's Solomon's porch. So that's where the events of chapter 10b occurred. That's where Jesus was. He was down here. Okay? Probably in chapter 8 when it says that Jesus came from the Mount of Olives and he was in the temple by the treasury, he was underneath this wall right here that was supported by a colonnade of pillars. Right? So chapter 8's events occur in this vicinity. Chapter 9, just immediately outside somewhere, probably south or southwest of the temple. And in chapter 10, the events in Solomon's porch occur to the southwest of the temple. Okay, any questions? Does anybody know where, when he told the man to go wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam, does anybody know where the pool of Siloam was situated in relationship to the temple? Okay, northeast or at least east. All right, there was two roads that run, one up the east, the left wall of the left embankment of the valley, one run along the east embankment of the valley, and just where the roads come together, just up in the V, is the pool of Siloam. There are two levels of it, right? There's an upper and a lower pool. And where did the water for those pools come from? Where did the water from the pools come from? It come from up further in the valley from a place called the Spring of Gihon. And in the days of Hezekiah, Hezekiah had constructed a conduit underground through solid rock that brought water from the Spring of Gihon down to the pool, to the upper pool of Siloam, which was probably inside the fortified wall at that time. At this present juncture, the wall that supports the eastern wall of the temple is, further back 100 more yards from where the pool of Siloam is now situated, but back in the Old Testament, the wall was further out. Okay? And so it provided water for them during the siege. The lower pool of Siloam was indefensible. They were open to attack to getting water. Right? I've seen pictures of of Hezekiah's tunnel there. I don't know if there was a picture in here. Let me just take a quick gander here. But it was quite an engineering feat. It was several hundred feet long, and they came within like 6 inches of one another. Workmen working from opposite ends. I guess I don't have it. Here's a plan of the temple. This wall right here separated the back half of the temple, was called the court of the priests, and of course the great structure, the dominant structure of that was right in the center, was the holy place, and the front structure was the court of Gentiles and women. And by the way, they have discovered one of the signs that was posted at this gate right here that separated the front from the back half of the temple. And they've only discovered the one written in Greek, right? But they've actually found it. And it says death to Jews, to defiled Jews and to women and to Gentiles across this line. They would be killed on the spot. Right? Kind of an interesting thing. Here's a map showing the location of the Spring of Gihon and the underground conduit that brought water to the upper pool of Siloam, and which was at that time inside the wall, distinct from the lower pool. So when Jesus told this man in chapter 9, Jesus was outside the gate. It's hard to tell whether the man, exactly where Jesus was, whether he was outside the eastern gate or outside the southern part of the temple or over towards Solomon's porch where he was in chapter 10. By the way, these pools are like 50 feet down in the ground. Like, it's huge holes in the ground, just to get water. Now, I think, well, we've got a half an hour. I haven't given you a very explicit subdivided outline, but I don't think I'm going to bother for these divisions in chapter 10. There is the final discussion in chapter 10 when the Jews were about to stone Jesus Christ. Prompted a response from Jesus that goes back to the Old Testament. Maybe we should just spend a little bit discussing that so that we understand it. Okay? In verse 33, the Jews answered him, saying, "For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy. And because thou, being a man, makest thyself God." Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods?" That's an interesting quotation, right? Let's read it. Let's go back to the Old Testament, Psalm 82, 6. Just read that to yourself there. It's only 8 verses long. Interesting passage, isn't it? Elohim is used to describe men. The very word that is used in the last verse of the psalm and in the first verse of the psalm to identify Jehovah. See? Psalm 82:1, God stands in the congregation and he judges among the gods. Alright? And then we have the quotation in verse 6 that Jesus actually alluded to here in John chapter 10. But then these human gods, these Elohim on the earth, which are mere men, mere mortals, they are distinct from the Most High in verse 6, and they are distinct in verse 8 from O God, singular, Eloah. Does anybody know, by the way, what the basic root idea of Elohim, or the singular Eloah, is? You know what the very concept of that word for God is? Adonai, the concept, basal concept for Adonai is Lord. The basal concept for Jehovah is eternality. Right? The basal concept for Elohim is strength, right, or power. And so it's not inappropriate for Jehovah himself to look at his own creatures, the highest of his creation, and to identify them with this very term, Elohim, which of course in its ultimate sense is reserved for himself. You understand what we're saying here? Creatures, mankind is strong in a lesser degree, of course, than God himself, but he is nevertheless strong. And so it's not inappropriate for Jehovah to call his people gods, but of course they are infinitely less than himself as the most strong, Elohim in the ultimate sense, the infinite sense. Okay. Now, if we go back to John chapter 10, let's just reread this passage, because they accused, in verse 33, the Jews accused Jesus of making himself God. So Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law?" And the quotation begins right after that. "I said, ye are gods. If he," that is the Most High, Jehovah, Jesus said, "if Jehovah called them gods to whom the word of God came," in other words, the recipients of Scripture, human beings, if he called them gods, and the Scripture cannot be broken, that's Jesus' view of the Bible right there. "Say ye of him whom the Father has sanctified and sent into the world," speaking of himself, "you blaspheme because I said I am the Son of God?" That's not a very well-known Old Testament passage, but it needs to be. It's sort of true that in one sense there's an analogy between Christianity and Hinduism. New Age. What's the analogy? Yes, we're all gods. In the sense, Christians understand it in the sense of being strong creatures, given strength by the ultimate, infinite God, which we are distinct from, right? We do not become God. Yes, I mean, it's the devil's old lie of trying to usurp God's position, right? Like God in position. Isaiah 14, same thing. I will ascend to the throne of the Most High. I will sit in the seat of the heaven. Okay? And so Jesus certainly proved that if he was distinct and unique, and Nicodemus, by the way, had already said, you must be a man sent from God if you can do these miracles. So it wasn't lost on the Jews that Jesus was a unique person. They were denying his identity with Jehovah. Chapter 8, and again here. And he argues, look, if Jehovah would call ordinary mortals gods, well then what's wrong with me calling myself God? It's a good argument, isn't it? Where's the passage in this chapter that is well known for eternal security reasons? I don't believe that you should separate 28 from 27 and 29, because all three verses are good. When Jesus says he knows us, that very word is not, he just doesn't know about us. I mean, he really knows us. He has an intimate relationship with us, is what is actually inferred in the word gnosko, intimacy. There's an intimate relationship in existence when he says he knows us. And then the kind of life that the shepherd gives is eternal life. If you can lose it, it's not eternal, right? And when he says never, he means just that. It doesn't mean possibly or sometimes or intermittently. It means never perish. Now, I've heard the ridiculous argument made that, well, maybe nobody will be able to pluck us out of God's hand, but we can sure jump out ourselves. That flies in the face of everything else here. Okay? No man. That includes you. See? That includes the one that may feel like as if he or she has jumped out of the Father's hand. No man is able to pluck that person out of my Father's hand, and to prove it, to prove the security of the person in God's intimate care, he identifies himself as being equal with the Father. Jehovah's Witnesses take John 10:30 as simply meaning one in spirit and in purpose. Right? I and my Father are one. That means one in goals. It's not what Jesus meant. Perfect unity. Essentially the same person. All right. Now, one last thing I'd like to say about this before we leave it, and I'm not sure that I have actually mentioned this to you before, but you need to pay close attention to the objects of faith in the Gospel of John, because you can draw a tremendous chart. Somebody quote John 1:12. Yes. Right. So first of all, I received Christ. As many as received Him, to them He gave the right to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on His name. So believing in the person of Christ is the same thing as believing in Christ's name. You ever asked yourself, what does it mean to believe in the name of Jesus? Well, it really means to believe in the person who is represented by the name. Okay, so that verse equates those two concepts. Right? John 3:16, 17, and 18. Quote those. Or, okay, we'll just slowly quote it. It'll come to you. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. That's 36. Yeah, that's 336. Verse 17 is, God did not send, he did not send Him into the world to condemn the world, but that through Him all the world might be saved. He that believeth not is condemned already, because he has not believed on the name of the only begotten Son of God. Okay? Now we come to John 5:24. What is John 5:24? Verily, verily, he that hears my word and believes on what? Him that sent me hath everlasting life. Right? So the object of faith is Him that sent me. Who's that? The Father. Right? And so if I believe in Jesus, I'll get saved. If I believe in the name of Jesus, same thing. If I believe in the Father who sent Jesus, same thing. Right? We come here to another point of analogy, and that is verse 37 and 38. If I do not the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do, that is, if I do the works of my Father, though you do not believe me, if you're unwilling to believe who my person is, if you're confused about that, what should you believe? Believe the works that I do. This, by the way, if you trace through this in the Gospel of John, this will prevent you from becoming so narrow-minded in your terminology. You know, I mean, Jesus was quite broad in the, what is it a person has to believe in? Well, one person may be really impressed with the works of Jesus. Another person is really impressed with the person. Right? Another person is impressed with his relationship to his Father. Well, fine. Put your faith in that. If genuine faith is not limited to one isolated thing. However, I believe that eventually, if it's true faith, it will come to an acceptance of all. Right? I can't remember all of them now. One time I went through and I connected them all. Let's see, what's another one? He that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words. So there's another one. My words. John 12:48. He that rejecteth me, Jesus said, is the same thing as rejecting his words. You reject his person, reject his words. See? Has one that judges him, the word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him. There's another one. Pardon? Yeah, that's a good one. That's one. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that receiveth whomsoever I send receiveth me. So believing in Christ is the same thing as believing whoever Christ sends. Well, who's that? Yeah, the apostles. To believe in the person of Christ is to believe in the miracles of Christ, is to believe in the teachings of Christ, is to believe in the apostolic doctrines. You can't separate them. They're all a harmony. It's a really, and you can, like, what prompted my my thinking on this was one time I was preaching, and there was a lady, some of you know her, Mrs. Nanchen. She was coming to church here at that time, and she's a very unique old lady with some strange ideas. One day she came out of church and she said, I don't agree with you. She said, I was preaching on faith, and she said, I only believe the words in red, because those were Jesus' words. You have to think about, how do you answer that? And then this just came to mind, and I studied it through, and I connected it up, that Jesus said, if you believe in me, right, you believe the people I send, right? So automatically that includes the rest of the New Testament, all the writings of the apostles, and it's really neat. Oh, and back in chapter 5, John chapter 5, do not think, verse 45 to 47, do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuses you, even Moses, in whom you trust. For had you believed Moses, you would have believed me. So Jesus said, look at, believe Moses. Believe Moses, you'll believe me. Why? Because he wrote of me. If you do not believe his writings, how shall you believe my words? So believing Moses' words is to accept Jesus' words. And so that includes the law, foundation for the Old Testament, right? And you can go, I'm not sure if you can find it in John, but you can find it in 2 Peter, where you accept the prophets as well as Moses, right? Remember in synthesis? We're done. But remember synthesis? We're just there in 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 3. I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance, that you may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior. And so Peter connects belief in the Old Testament to the belief in the apostles' words. Okay? That's a good thing to file away for your own counseling. Okay, that's enough for today. This assignment is, next class will be your exam. Okay? So it'll be that one I put on the board here.
That's an assignment. We do in class?
It's an in-class test sort of thing, assignment, yeah.